Let's talk samples. And what I mean is the different types of samples. See, during the process of getting from concept to production, there are different types of samples along the way. Each of them has its own purpose, has its own names, and therefore, for you to get familiar with them, it will help you better communicate with your factories, with your sample rooms, with your pattern makers, because some of them have specific purpose to them. And if you're not aware of that purpose, you might assume it's done for one purpose when it's done for a different purpose. And I've seen many, many, many mistakes and things that go wrong simply with that matter. So let's see what are the types of samples. And I'll walk you through those samples in the order of how they show up in the process from concept to production. So the first sample is fit sample, or at times it's called muslin, or even toile. In Europe, they refer to it more like toile. Fit sample has a specific purpose, very simple one, to test the fit of the pattern. So the whole idea of that sample is a mock-up where you get to test the pattern, test the fit, just get a general idea of how the pattern is, general idea of the style. It's a good time to test design lines, design details. So therefore, it's not a sample that will be fully finished. It's not a sample that many times is done in the right fabric, meaning the fabric that you will end up using in production. So it's a sample that will be made many times. Normally, it's done in muslin fabric, that beige fabric, cotton fabric, which is why sometimes it refers to as muslin, or it can be done in fabrics that are very similar to the fabrics that you are going to use in production. Now, you can use your actual fabrics, the ones that you're going to use in production. In fact, in some categories, swimwear, activewear, lingerie, I would actually recommend to use the actual fabric. But in most other cases, the reason why it's not made in that fabric is you might not have that on hand and you don't want to wait. Or maybe the fabric that you're going to use for production is too expensive and you don't want to waste it on just a quick mock-up. So muslin, fit sample, toile. The purpose is to figure out or test really the pattern, test fit, test design details, test any kind of let's say, pocketing or finishings. Again, it's not fully finished, but if there's specific finishes or ideas of design that you're not sure how they're going to come out, or you want to see if your factory can do them, or can they actually be done, that's a good time to test these things. The next type of samples in line is going to be SMS sample. An SMS sample stands for salesman sample. The purpose of that sample is strictly for presentation. So when you present your line to buyers, to retailers, to customers, you do a photo shoot many times, this will be the samples that you'll use. So it's done basically still in the development process, normally at the end of the development process, but before production. However, it will be made in the right fabrics, the right trim, the right colors of production, fully finished, of course. You might not have the labels inside, and that's fine. Again, depends where you're making it, if you have labels on hand already or not. But if you don't, that's completely fine. Again, the purpose of it is to present the design, the details to buyer, which means that in many cases, that sample might not be fully fitted or completely ready for production. What I mean is, during the development process, this might be the second or third sample that you'll make in this pattern. And you'll know it looks good. It's definitely show the style, represents the style. the buyer, the customer can get a very clear idea of what this looks like. They can touch the fabric, see the colors, all of these things. However, in the back of my mind, I know that I need to do small little tweaks still. Maybe change a little bit, the length of the sleeve or the length of the dress or little things like this, but I don't need to do them yet. I'll do them when I go into production. Okay, so that is SMS Sample, mostly for presentation. The next sample in line is PP sample. PP stands for pre-production. So pre-production sample is basically a finished sample, the right fabric, the right color, the right trim, with the labels, everything as if it was a finished product from production. In fact, that PP sample is basically done as the standard for what you're going to expect your factory to provide you in production. So it's a little different when you do or produce things domestically or offshore. When you produce offshore, that is one of the steps that you take, and it has to happen. Very important part here. Although the PP sample will be made in the right fabrics and trims that you will use in production, it should be made before your production is being cut. Okay, so when you work with factories overseas, you want to make sure to tell them that you need this sample made and the fabrics from production with the trim from production, but this needs to happen and sent to you for approval before they start production. Because if there are little things that you still need to go over, fix, adjust, maybe things that they didn't get right, this is sort of like the last step before product is going to be cut. So if there's things that you can change, you can still make them and change them there. So it's important to have the PP sample done before production is being cut. Okay, in the domestic market, same thing. You can ask for it. Many times the SMS and PP sample in the domestic market will overlap, or it will be one sample that serves both purposes, but definitely have a separate SMS and a separate PP sample going into production overseas. The next, by the way, the PP sample is also not just the standard for the factory to know what you follow, but if you work with overseas again, or even if you work with a factory that you're going to send someone else who's not you to check on quality, a third party, for example, you would send in the PP sample. This is what they will look at and compare production to. Like I said, this is the standard for production. The next sample in line, and the last one, is TOP samples. And TOP stands for top of production sample. So PP sample was done, all correct. You give your factory the okay to go into production. They went ahead and cut the goods. They cut the fabric. Before they go ahead and sew the whole production, they should make one sample, usually one. Sometimes you can ask for more, depends on the style and the size ranges and stuff like that. But the TOP sample is done from the cut work of production. In other words, the main reason for the TOP is to check and make sure that nothing went wrong in the cutting, that there are no issues in production, because if they're going to pick the actual pieces to make that sample from your cut work, the production cut work, and so on sample from it, if there are some issues, this is the time to be aware of them. And many times there are little tweaks, little things that they might need to pay attention more in production. And by making that sample, it will allow them to make these adjustments. Okay, so fit sample, muslin, toile is the first one. SMS sample is the second one. Fit sample, the purpose is fit and seeing details. SMS purpose is for presentation, PP sample, pre-production sample, before you go into production to set up the standard of what production should look like, and TOP sample, top of production sample, should be pulled out of production, made for you to be approved, basically as the last step before going and sewing your whole production line.